This month, I sit down with Betsy, Pearson, Rob, and Sean to talk about card games. From collectible card games like Magic the Gathering, to living card games like Android Netrunner, to deck-building games like Ascension, and digital card games like Hearthstone. Why has this genre of game endured, and what are the differences between the business models of each game? Which games do we currently play, and which ones do we wish we had more time for?
My name is Alex, and you can find me at Alex G. Orlando.
My name is Sean, and you can find me at Sean Dory.
My name is Betsy. You can find me at Betsy Bray.
My name is Pearson, and I'm hopelessly addicted to card games.
My name is Rob. You can find me at Robot Parking on mastodon.social.
Excellent. Wonderful. You won't be found. Sorry. This month, we... God damn it! You ask the questions. You! Okay? No, I'm not. No, I worked way too hard to come up with these finely crafted questions about card games.
Okay, all right.
This month on the FPS podcast, we're talking about card games, which was... It's not my forte, and we're going to just roll with it because we got a bunch of people here that do really like card games, and quite frankly, we do not publish quite enough about card games or non-digital games on FPS, so we'd like to have a conversation about CCG, LCG. What's the difference between the two? What does those acronyms even mean?
The classic card game, when most people think about games like Magic the Gathering, is the collectible card game format. When you see people tearing wrappers off of hundreds upon hundreds of cards and only keeping one and throwing the rest out, that's a collectible card game. LCG stands for living card game, which is a slightly different take on distribution models in these card games. I have been playing a lot of LCGs, so I will happily explain what the specificities of those are. But we have some other CCG experts here in the room that might be interested in kind of explaining the vagaries of the CCG distribution model, if anybody wants to. Okay, no, not Bueller.
I'm looking at our Magic expert over here.
Why would I'm not the Magic expert?
You are far better at Magic than I am.
Tell us about how you acquire Magic cards, Betsy. I want to hear all about it.
Those backdoor deals.
Oh, totally. Nothing but you just walk down the back alley, there's a guy in a trench coat and says, you want to buy some Magic cards? And
I got the good stuff.
Oh, yeah. All the mythic rares. Basically... I prefer to use a slightly different model than I think my partner plays. I would say a bit more seriously than me, and he will, scour the websites and figure out exactly what he needs for any given deck that he wants to build, and he'll piece part buy the things. And I'm a lot more likely to just buy packs and say like, ooh, this is a cool card. I'm going to build a deck around that. But I'm also not nearly as competitive. So I would say those are the two kinds of models you get for standard rotation collectible card game play. The standard rotation is just whatever is currently able to be played, like in some various kinds of formats and things like that. So you do have different kinds of play styles that you would see, basically buying cards, getting cards, collecting cards differently.
And actually, to your point, there's an interesting thing that occurs because in collectible card games, for those who aren't aware, the distribution model is randomized. So in a given pack, you'll buy a pack of cards. I think there's 11 or 12 in a standard booster pack.
Oh man, that seems like a thing I should know after the number I've
15.
opened.
Sorry.
It's never enough.
I think it's 15.
15 in a standard.
At least for
booster
Magic.
pack. Depends on I think the size of the set as well. If it's a large set or a small set, but. In effect, when you buy one of these packs and open them up, there's going to be a distribution of cards in that pack that is quasi-random, But the general rule of thumb is that the more powerful and the more useful a card is, the rarer it will be, the more difficult it will be to find one of these things. And packs typically retail from anywhere between $3 and $5, depending on the store or the place that you get them. And so it's common practice, especially for extremely competitive players who are seeking a very specific subset of cards to build a competitive deck and then play in tournaments and win money and lord their sanctimony over those who can't afford, hundreds of dollars of Magic cards. They will buy boxes upon boxes of these booster packs, open them all up in the hopes that they get a very, very tiny subset of the cards that they could possibly find in these boxes of boosters. This has led to some fairly interesting practices that have evolved around games such as Magic the Gathering and other collectible card games. Legend of the Five Rings, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon, the trading card game, all these things come to mind as games that follow a similar model. And so the collecting of the game kind of becomes part of the game, as the moniker might imply. Collectible card game.
Exactly, and I definitely enjoy the looking at the cards and putting the pieces together more than I enjoy necessarily winning games with those cards that I find. I just think it's a lot more interesting to see the interactions you can get with what you get, as opposed to purposefully crafting this sort of, deck of mass destruction kind of a thing.
Yeah, I think I tend towards LCGs, specifically Android Netrunner, in part because a lot of the CCGs, they tend to be a very massive money sink where not saying that like Netrunner can't also be a massive money sink. If you get deep enough with that community, people will be like, well, why don't you buy a second copy of the core set? And I'm like, no.
I'm on my third.
Yeah. But that said, like I was playing some casual Magic at lunch a couple months back and was hanging out with someone who was much younger than myself and sitting in a room with like another coworker who like had a mortgage and a kid. And he was just like casually talking about how like a competitive Magic deck was like $500
on the low end.
On the low end. And we're like, that's not $0. That's not nothing. That's a lot of money to just like feel competitive. I think my frustration, with Magic and CCGs in general is the idea, is that scarcity and that rarity. Even though I still like opening up packs of cards and finding bats and then goggles and then thinking about a time in which I could like equip the goggles on the bats.
Bat goggles!
Yeah. And that's, I think thematically and mechanically, Magic has a lot of really interesting things going for it, and they can kind of upend the cart anytime they want with like a new expansion, but it always tends to be at least relatively well balanced. There's a certain level that I can appreciate there of the density of that design, even as it's still approachable.
And so I just wanted to jump in there and add, I mean, I'm sure we all have stories, most of us have stories about times that we've drafted or played alternative forms of Magic the Gathering. Because when we think about card games such as Magic the Gathering, we often tend to think about the constructed varieties of the game, where you purposefully build a deck of, say, 60 cards, take it to a tournament and play it to see how it fares against other players' decks of 60 cards. But the actual process of acquisition, apart from being interesting and rewarding in its own right for many people that play Magic, has also been turned into a mode of play in things such as the limited or sealed or draft formats, where the act of buying a pack of cards is intrinsically related to how one then goes on to play that exact pack of cards. Drafting involving everybody opening up a booster pack, taking one card, and then passing the remainder to somebody on their left or right, and doing so until you have something resembling a deck, or not. And the sealed involving not passing those cards around, but just opening a set number of booster packs and trying to build cards from a deck from what cards you get. And both of these kind of harness this randomness, this indeterminacy that's inherent in Magic the Gathering's release model, and makes for an interesting way to explore card combinations that one might not find in the highly optimized, highly constrained, competitive formats that revolve around a very small subset of the cards available. While at the same time also acquiring new cards for one's collection, because you might find some pretty important rares in that draft, and oftentimes the draft will end and people will then get to select cards from the booster packs that were opened based on how well they did in a little ad hoc tournament that was put together. And so drafting has become a very important part of the CCG model.
So like one of my questions is, why has the genre of the game endured? And to me, like I think about this with Warhammer too, where I wonder how whole shops exist for Warhammer, and why, like if Magic is such a money sink, and you think of how limited the player base is when you're requiring someone to pay at least $500 for a game to compete. Would you say maybe that drafting is kind of a way to mitigate that kind of like high barrier to entry?
For sure, and I definitely find that, I've played last time I played at a game store in like a public tournament, I played against a $500 competition deck. It was a blue-white flash with, full art lands and foil cards, and it was just awful, but I held even with them, and I've never seen somebody so mad in my entire life.
Because of course you didn't bring a deck that was $500.
No, it was not a $500 deck. It was like, I think this is a nifty card. I don't see people playing with this. I'm going to make a mess with this, and I did, and it worked pretty well. And that kind of thing does really irritate that kind of player. Whereas when you do something like a sealed or a draft instead, everybody just works with what they've got, and I guess that. It's kind of biased of me because it does reward my play style where I'm like, this is weird, let's see what happens. Where some people need to do the more constructed, more thought out, put together thing. So, I can see where my preference comes from, but I think it's definitely a way to mitigate the costs of all of that because it does get stupidly expensive.
The thing that you were kind of getting at, I think, Betsy, in your account of what you found interesting about Magic the Gathering, and to answer your question, Alex, is that the games such as Magic the Gathering are constantly renewing the strategic space in which they dwell. And so one of the benefits to having new cards released on a regular basis is that there's these emergent systems that come out of the relatively simple pieces that a game of Magic the Gathering is made out of, but they interact in emergent ways so that the interactions are more complex and more interesting than you would be able to determine by just considering the individual parts in a vacuum. We, in fact, have run a commentary piece earlier on FPS about lenticular design. I forget the name of the author.
Greco?
Gino Greco.
Gino Greco? Yeah, take it from somebody who actually hasn't.
It's a really good piece.
Lenticular design refers to something similar to this emergence, which is the complex interaction of relatively simple pieces. But the phenomena that I think you were kind of running up against in the case of this person with a $500 deck, yes, it wasn't only that you were defeating his extremely expensive pile of cardboard with your considerably less expensive pile of cardboard. It was also that you were doing so in defiance of what this person expected to be good in this particular card environment, which, although it's a much larger topic, basically is what the metagame boils down to. Metagames are your knowledge of the game and the way other people are playing the game outside of a given match. A given match being, one set of play between two people with two decks. Of course, the thing that makes Magic the Gathering interesting to play year after year after year is knowing what other people are playing, trying to account for that, counter it, try to break against it, try to come up with systems and combinations that people find surprising or interesting or fun or annoying as all hell, as the case may be.
Yep.
And then trying to time the releases so that by the time everybody has sat down together and figured out the interesting nuances of this particular environment, the things that are possible and afforded by the cards that are released at that given moment in time, a whole set of cards gets pushed out of the environment and a new set of cards gets released. And yes, of course, that means that people have to pay more money to keep up their collections, but it does also renew the metagame. So suddenly there's this interesting puzzle that has been posed to people, not only in terms of how to make well-tuned competitive decks, but also how to be experimental and express the self in relation to the metagame, and it's the metagame that contextualizes and gives meaning to those acts. And so I think that's kind of the answer to the question that I would posit, at least, is that it's by harnessing the expressive and meaning-making powers of what we now know of as a metagame that Magic kind of unintentionally has had such staying power. It's this ability to renew the strategic elements that it relies on for fun.
Well, and I'm going to be, I guess, the skeptic or like the outsider in this, but I also see that as an enormous demand because you are constantly having to rethink and re-strategize, and that's not something that everybody maybe wants to do.
I think what Magic does in particular about that is it has multiple formats. Like Standard is the one that Pearson just described, where cards are good. Right now, the way that they have Standard set up, cards are good for about 2 years to be able to play in that format. But you can also play in Modern or Legacy, and those have different rules about what you can and can't play. So some of them keep things alive longer, but of course the ones that Wizards of the Coast pushes and publicizes and the big tournaments, that's all the standard stuff. Comes out like 3 times a year, I want to say. New cards come out.
And if you imagine that people spend typically about $250, $300 on a new set that comes out every single time a new set comes out, it makes sense that the most heavily capitalized of all the formats in Magic the Gathering is the one that also engenders the most sales at each given moment in time.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So this is why Magic the Gathering has been able to sustain a very heavily capitalized competitive scene where, yes, you have to put out a lot of money in order to gain entry to the top echelons of competitive play, but there are also massive financial rewards, both in terms of cards that you can get back, but also cash money, real, honest-to-God, cold, hard cash that you can win for pushing cardboard around a table.
So you're saying that basically Magic is pay to win?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Definitely
just
agree.
throwing that out there.
Yeah.
Because there are some very diehard video game fans that absolutely abhor that business model, but will hold up Magic as like a paragon of game design.
But here I would also throw in that I find oftentimes when people think of tabletop, they're like, expensive. Only certain people can buy into this. But if you think of things like gaming too, especially PC gaming, to keep up with the latest games, you do have to spend way more than $500 to update your system every few years. And that seems to be roughly the turnaround of Magic cards. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess Magic cards individually are cheaper, and computers, and PC parts are more expensive. I don't know. It's like, maybe it's not an apt comparison because you can also use your computer for other things, and you can't really use Magic cards for practical, a day-to-day
They
thing.
make great coasters.
You
Co-
could
I
you
get
could
in trouble
attach
when I use them as coasters.
you could attach one to your bike, and then it could make some
Yeah.
cooking. Do that with a Black Lotus. It'd be great.
There you go.
Oh my god, you just hurt my soul.
Throw away several $100,000.
So it occurs to me that we still haven't really talked about living card
Yeah.
games
Yes.
at all,
Right.
even though we
Yeah.
promised to get to living card games.
Yeah,
Did you even say the thing that
stop
that you wanted to say?
Yeah. So the,
Okay.
the
yeah.
metagaming was the thing that I wanted to talk about because I think it's really important to the longevity of these games. But we've been talking around the expense issue, and I think that's an important thing to clear up before we actually get into the living card game format, because it is very much a response to the extremely heavily capitalized CCG model, which, yes, is pay to win, but I would argue that it's not necessarily pay to fun. As in, people can have a lot of fun with Magic
Sure.
the Gathering, spending relatively little amounts of money. What the living card game format, which is a proprietary format, it's in fact a trademarked name, developed by a company called Fantasy Flight Games, which until they had released these types of games, the living card games had been known for more traditional boxed board games like Puerto Rico. They didn't do Puerto Rico; they did like Battlestar Galactica, the board game. And the living card game model is designed to ameliorate the incredible capital outflow that people need to sustain in order to stay current in a metagame format. So living card games are designed with one central core set, the cards within which will stay legal or part of the present competitive environment for the game for perpetuity. They'll never cycle out of play. And then every month, typically, there are some variations, but every month, typically, the company releases 60 new cards, 20 unique cards, but 3 copies each of those in these packs that come out, and they are non-randomized. And this is the biggest difference between collectible card games and living card games, is that every time you go to the store and you spend your $15 on a pack of living card game expansion cards, you know exactly what you're getting, and almost more importantly, you know that everybody else that's playing the game will probably have the exact same cards. So for the price of a World of Warcraft monthly submission, you are in fact staying current with the metagame in a way that would cost you several orders of magnitude more money to do in a game like Magic the Gathering. And the other thing that the living card game format attempts to do, and it really is kind of implicit in this living moniker that Fantasy Flight Games gave it, is this notion that the metagame shifts more regularly. Magic, it tends to be a set of cards is released once every 4 months, and it takes, on average, 3 weeks to a month for it really to get figured out and almost solved, where there's a really strong sense of what the best decks are and what you have to do to beat it. And oftentimes people describe losing interest in the game after the stakes have been set and you know there's no point in experimenting because all the good ideas have already been found and put out there. Living card games try to get around that problem by releasing new cards which reshape the metagame on a more consistent basis so that people are constantly having to rethink the strategic environment into which they are playing, which to your comment, yes, it sounds like hell to some people. who I'm sure would like to play their games the way they like to and not have to constantly rebuild and rethink their decks. But other people do enjoy that. Yeah, sure.
Well, I used to be really big into CCGs, and then fiscal reasons, I kind of got out of it. I didn't want to get back into the meta after like a year of not playing. And then I started getting interested in living card games. But now I'm starting to be, this is kind of scaring me off because, like, as someone who's just coming in, how does someone mitigate, like, okay, so a game's been out for 4 years and $15 a month for 4 years, say.
Yep, that's the problem with Netrunner right now is like I have the core set, I have a few data packs I've picked up over time, but I've been a casual player at best. And so it's always been a situation of like talking to friends of the site who are very like gung-ho about Netrunner, and there's like, oh, you just need to drop like $250. I'm like, I got into this game because I didn't want to do the magic thing.
I will throw in though, at least with Netrunner, like that's something that I can play at home with a friend, and I don't need to necessarily, because we have the cards available with like even the core set. You buy the core set and you have enough to play 2 players and just for fun.
And because there's not the scarcity inherent in, I mean, data packs eventually go to print and they're a bit harder to come by and all that stuff. But for the most part, like you can more or less get the cards that you need to get if you need them. But because LCGs are not necessarily based on like, oh, this is a rare card, this is a hard to find card, the fan base is a lot more open to platforms that let you play online, even though they're not necessarily completely legal-ish. They're kind of in a gray area. So there's Jinteki.net and
the horribly named ThroneTechie.net, which just recently came out. For the Game of Thrones card game, somebody decided to take the moniker of Jinteki.net and just add Throne to it. And
oh, perfect.
A great idea.
What a time to be
Terrible
alive.
name.
But what Jinteki does is at the very least, like, you just have access to all the cards. And if you just want to play with someone casually online, you can do it. And it has most of the stuff coded in, and like it's a pretty approachable interface. And you can kind of just like, browse what other decks have been built and build your own or whatever. It allows for sort of a lot more. I have a hard time finding consistent people to play Netrunner with, or consistently finding the time to like sit down with someone and play. I did a sort of game demo / commentary that was wholly just a shit show at CGSA a couple years back. In the run up to that, I was like I had like a small group of people that are now former editors of FPS. They would come over to my place and I would basically teach them how to play the game. And then one moved to St. Catharines and the other had to go finish his dissertation.
How dare they?
Yeah.
School getting in the way of
And so
not
I had
school.
to turn to Jinteki and a couple other places to continue getting that fix. It's tough, but on the upside, like there are communities you can kind of join into, but I feel like there's still like online tools to play Magic with other human beings, but they are heavily monetized in a way that the other tools are not.
Well,
So.
your real cards don't do you any good online. You have to either devote all of your money into playing online and buying online cards, or you can, do the actual ones. But the actual cards you have in person don't translate to any value or any use whatsoever in Magic Online. You have to buy online packs.
But Betsy, that means I can buy the whole game twice over. Double the fun.
Why would you? Okay.
Yeah, no, actually, that sounds like total complete nightmare to have to buy it twice, and it's like that is one of the reasons why I early on decided to just do one, and it's okay for me. Like I have like 3 or 4 friends that I play Magic with pretty consistently, and we just kind of build trash decks and play each other. Like we don't put all the money into it. We just kind of play with what we've got, or sometimes we'll actually put like $10 into building a new deck or something like that. I don't particularly like playing with people I don't know. I have found the environment is perhaps not suited to someone like me.
I have a question about that. We can talk about the culture of card games, but first maybe I'd like to also ask, what else are you guys playing besides Magic and Netrunner, or which do you wish you had more time to play?
I only play Magic. I don't play any living card games. I've learned about them today, but I didn't really know that was a thing. I just play Magic.
Are we extending out to like box card games, like
You
stuff
go whatever
like,
you want.
Okay, because like I'm currently like working on a card game, and I want more experience playing games like Snake Oil and those like more family friendly kind of like deck focused or like hand focused things. They're kind of like that step out into this like deeper realm. We kind of like dived right in we were having this conversation earlier, and
Yeah, I was going to say, like, to me, card games is very much like the thing that you bring out when you don't have to teach anyone how to play a game, but we all want to play a game. So, and for my family, it's always been like Italian cards, which, if you've never seen Italian cards before, are pretty cool. We should put a link to the post. They're all different. They're still like English cards in that there's suits and numbers, but they're all really cool artwork. So instead of hearts, diamonds, spades, and clubs, it's the English translation: suns, swords, cups, and clubs. But they're physical clubs.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. But like, and that was just like a thing that like old Italian men would just do, is they'd sit around like a coffee shop or something like that, and they'd have their table, and they'd play briscola or something like that, and like very violently. Like that was a thing. Like they're like literally like slamming the cards down on the table, and like when you're doing a more dramatic move, you slam harder. So that was just like a thing that we used to do. And we used to play for ice cream. So like the losers would have to get the winner's ice cream. But yeah, or like Uno or things like that. Just like things that like we want to play a game, but like I don't want to sit down and explain a board game. So I'm going to bring out the cards. It's just a quick little like fun sort of thing.
I was kind of alluding to that thing that I don't really like agreeing with, but like the ethos of like some games are deeper games, but all games are games, really. But like I still find that line weird and arbitrary and interesting to like kind of point out. And since this is like the first time we're really looking at card games besides the word I can't pronounce piece.
Lenticular design.
It's a really seriously cool commentary.
I feel like it's valuable to be like, hey, yo, all of these are things that exist. And
I really
cool.
like deck building games like Ascension as well.
Oh yeah,
Because I feel like that would be like if people were like, I don't want to go play Rummy, I'm not 85, like it's like,
Hey, hold on.
Hey, Rummy can be good.
no, but there are absolutely people that are just like, oh, that's old person stuff, which is
Yeah, I
I
get
disagree
that.
with that
Bridge
wholeheartedly.
and-
Like we have Romoli, and I play the hell out of that game, but yeah, I bust out like Ascension or something like that, where it's like very approachable to people, but at a certain point, it's not like you are like building your own deck by buying cards off of a board basically, and then playing stuff and scoring off of that, and there is some depth to the strategy, but at a certain point, also it's just kind of down to whatever.
I used to play a lot of Dominion, and like it was really interesting. Is like every game has a different like set of resources you get to choose from, which really changes the meta from game to game.
I've heard the Resident Evil deck building game is really good. Just throwing that out there because I was thinking about it. But
We're not excited for the new Resident Evil or anything.
No,
Totally not.
I haven't been playing exclusively Resident Evil.
We're
games
going to
all
date
my-
this podcast very quickly
yeah,
because it
No.
comes out tomorrow
Yeah.
and it will be up not tomorrow.
Now you know. Card game.
You play all the card games,
play all the card
Pearson,
games.
so
I guess I
Game
didn't
of
really.
Thrones.
I'm going to talk about a lot of card games as quickly as I can right now because I don't want to, again, dominate the conversation. But I think everybody probably remembers when they first encountered Magic the Gathering. Everybody kind of has their moment where somebody introduced them to the game. And I think I was 7 years old when my cousin introduced me to the game. And I thought it was the coolest. And I thought my cousin by association was the coolest ever. And it didn't actually take me long to burn out on Magic. And I kind of left card games alone for a little while before I wound up picking up Legend of the Five Rings, which was because it is now dead, another collectible card game that came out, I think, the year after Magic the Gathering did. And had a much different ethos in terms of the community that it engendered. I really enjoyed playing that game for a while, but it was no less expensive than Magic the Gathering would wind up being. And around the time where Legend of the Five Rings as a game was beginning to shed community members and kind of disassemble itself, which was a very sad process to see, the living card game format was beginning to come into its own and take off in a big way. And so the first one that I encountered actually was the Lord of the Rings, the cooperative card game where players build decks to fight monsters together and try and beat certain scenarios, which is one of the first card games. And then I encountered the Game of Thrones living card game, which was actually how I was introduced to the entire series. I hadn't heard of it at all before, started playing the game, and then I was like, oh, cool, there's a show coming out, and the rest is history. And then Netrunner came out, and Netrunner was a bit of a different sort because it was the first living card game that Fantasy Flight Games released that wasn't based on an external intellectual property. So all the games they had released up till that point, and I think actually still till now, are based on intellectual properties that originate from somewhere else. But the world of Android Netrunner is one that, although borrowing very heavily from William Gibson and many other authors in the cyberpunk tradition, was kind of something that was authored by the people at Fantasy Flight and has since gone on to be the most popular.
It was originally a CCG.
Yes, it was. Yeah, but the intellectual property in terms of the world, the theme, was not present in the So sorry, I should break that down because you're right, Rob. The mechanics of the game are based off of Richard Garfield's game called Netrunner, not Android Netrunner, but just Netrunner, that was a collectible card game that died in its own right, and Fantasy Flight picked it up and turned it into Android Netrunner, Android being the name of the world that they set it in. And then since they have come out with Star Wars LCG, they're releasing a Cthulhu LCG. They had one already, but it's coming out. I played the Warhammer Conquest LCG, which died as a result of a licensing disagreement between Fantasy Flight Games and the person they were licensing from. And then Legend of the Five Rings, much to my joy, is being reborn as a living card game by Fantasy Flight Games, and it should be released this summer. And there's not a day that goes by where I don't think about it and squee. Sorry? Oh, sorry. Yeah, Richard Garfield is our Lord and Savior.
Oh, God.
There's going to be a fight in this room, folks.
No. I swear I didn't actually.
Did someone say
it.
The Witness, too? While we're talking about our favorite people?
No! God, no. No. Richard Garfield is the person that designed Magic the Gathering and was also responsible for the design of a few other important card games back in the day.
I got into Magic at a very young age. I got in, I think my first couple packs were around the time that 3rd edition was hitting. So it was like, it was just becoming a thing. It was mostly just like, I was at the comic book store looking at comic books because I was Team Me. And there was literally nothing else to do in my community. And the guy that ran the place was fantastic, Comic Express in a small town in Ontario. And he was fantastic. Like, he didn't care about a bunch of weird punk kids hanging out at his place all day long. I got into it and was just kind of playing. I was really bad at it. I just would get cards that I thought were neat. And I was like I was slowly becoming a very like casual goth person at the time. And so Magic had the Sengir vampire, and I was like, I want more vampires in my game. And so I was around during like the weird gold rush of like everyone just like they started seeing the money that was coming out of Magic, and everyone started making CCGs, and a lot of them failed. Like Netrunner was one of those ones, which I just wasn't aware of at the time. And there was Vampire: The Eternal Struggle, which was previously Jihad, and then they kind of renamed that after I think a lot of people kind of had a stern talk with them, and that was based on the Vampire the Masquerade tabletop role-playing rule set, and it was card games, and it was a neat, cool thing. And I've actually even recently picked up sealed starter decks because in my heart of hearts I want to believe that there's another broken soul like me out there who wants to play this game. Okay. Pearson, you and me, we'll have a
Pearson raised his hand.
VTS night. And also one of my favorite tweets of the past few years was someone they tweeted an image from Dune, the card game, and the caption was Dune, the card game. Dune, the CCG was like created to test the faithful, because holy shit, that game was so complicated. I read that rule book about 7 or 8 times, and it was my favorite like science fiction thing growing up. And I was like, they made it for me, and then I could never find anyone who wanted to play it with me, and I also could never understand the game enough to explain it to someone to get them to play it with me.
Was the rule book longer than Dune itself?
No, it was not longer than Dune, but it was just like so complicated. There were so many weird different states of things, and
as is Dune the films overall. The
Yeah.
weird states of Dune.
Yeah, and more recently, Netrunner. I do play Magic, but I'm a little bit better at playing Magic. But I just buy pre-constructed decks. And the thing that got me back into it was, I believe, the Shadows over Innistrad set. Whatever one had like a starter deck you could buy that was just a whole bunch of vampires. I was like, it's my brand.
Yeah. While we're on the subject, we kind of like hinted towards it. So what exactly happens? Like when you guys say like the card games are dying, what's the process there? What's the grieving process? What are the 5 stages of the death of a card game? Like what is exactly about that?
Medically inadvisable amounts of whiskey is the grieving process.
I guess it's just it gets harder and harder to find people to play it with. Is the first one?
That's the first stage.
That's the first stage. I don't know. Like I feel like a lot of those can get resurrected through I want to say Octagon every single time, and I don't think that's actually, it's OCT AGN.
No,
Yeah,
it
is called
Octagon is the phonemic interpretation
Yeah.
of something that doesn't actually spell that.
So Octagon it allows you to play with other people on the internet,
Okay.
and it has just scanned cards, like entire card collections for a wide range of games, and some of the rules are kind of coded in, some of them are not, and so that's where it's a little bit challenging because it's not super user friendly, and everyone has to really understand what's going on, and yeah, it's tough, but you can probably find a way to keep going with your favorite game, but yeah.
You're kind of trailing off at this point, and I am struggling to put words to what occurs when a game begins to descend, which is something that people who have played Magic the Gathering won't probably know ever, possibly, if not for a very long time, because Magic has been the strongest and most popular of all, and there's never been any doubts as to how strongly Magic has been followed. But other card games, you can tell that they're beginning to descend when the forums stop being as active, when certain stores stop carrying the product that usually they would carry every month. And something interesting happens because oftentimes you find, you have 2 or 3 or 4 friends in a small community who enjoy playing a game that is not Magic, because everybody plays Magic. But if it's a game like Legend of the Five Rings, you have your 5 Legend of the Five Rings friends. And as fun as it is to play amongst those 5 people, oftentimes a good portion of the fun, at least for me and many others that I know anecdotally, was not playing against each other for the purpose of competing, but rather the purpose of testing and honing one's skills with a mind to later go into a competitive context. Basically, you're trying to prepare for a tournament with your friends. So the 5 friends, and this is actually quite the vaunted practice, would get T-shirts printed that would indicate where they're from and the store that they played, and have a team name, and they would go together. It was you were trying to contextualize your play and your local context vis-a-vis the broader statistical metagame that you were aware of, wherein the way the game was being played worldwide would be aggregated and understood on that level. Even if those 5 friends still loved, let's say, Legend of the Five Rings for argument, but the game began to rot and die everywhere else, people stopped playing it, people stopped engaging in it, suddenly the context, the 5 of us against the world, disappears, and it loses a lot of the luster that it once had. And so,
Do you stay friends with those friends?
I have, in fact, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm so glad. I was getting really worried.
It's
And there's and also then
About your 5 rings.
yeah, and then the 5 rings just stopped hanging out.
No,
The 5 rings crew.
You can. I have it. I can tell you confidently that I'm actually part of a Facebook group right now with a whole bunch of people that I met from around the world. I used to travel to play Legend of the Five Rings in various places, and we are currently conspiring to find a way to descend upon Gen Con 2017 in Indianapolis to buy up as many copies of the Legend of the Five Rings core set for the re-release as we can, coordinating hotel rooms, transportation.
That sounds like a bad idea.
That sounds like it's
because
it's
then
gonna,
you're not going to let anyone else play
You're
the
gonna
game because
destroy
you're going to
that
buy all
scene.
the games.
Oh mine! Oh mine! No, they.
The parallels
are you calling yourselves the Golems?
Precious. No, it's going to be some kind of weird bastardization of a Japanese name, probably, because it's a game about samurai. So
I literally thought it was Lord of the Rings.
no, Legend of the Five Rings is
There was never 5, only 3 and 8 or whatever.
7.
3, 13,
Yeah.
3, 9, 13,
Storm
1.
is coming.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm getting way too specific, but yes, I've stayed friends with the people that I met through that, and I think my story is but one of many that are that's very similar across the board. People, finding community that endure even beyond the lifespan of these games that they met through.
I think I think it's more easy for me to talk about like when a game is dying for me,
Yeah.
which is more just whatever the new release stuff is. It's not engaging me in any way, like the new, either thematically or mechanically. There's just something there that like I was looking for and I was really enjoying, and that became not the focus for the people making the game or the people playing it.
I was going to say, like, I associate, like, CCGs with very specific periods of my life, very specific, like, outlooks on the world, because I was always trying to be in that, like, kind of, like, meta, like, competitive scene. And, like, now, the older I get, the more, like, gross that is, we'll say.
So speaking of gross, well, and to tie back to Betsy's like comment that she just doesn't feel comfortable playing with strangers. To me, one of the most frightening things in the nerd community is the hobby shop play space, either at the back or the very front of the store. And I distinctly remember like these existing not even in game shops, but even anime shops, which don't exist anymore. But there used to be one here in Waterloo, which I'd make the pilgrimage to when I used to live in Cambridge. It was just an anime shop with only anime, and that was the best. But it also had one of those games tables, and those are like part of the reason why I don't think I ever will play card games. Not maybe like casually. Like I have played card games casually, but never put money towards it or take it anywhere seriously, because that culture is just a place that I do not want to exist in. You know, it's a bad scene. And I try to think about it in the context of like gaming, in-person gaming spaces. For those who have any experience, what do you think the difference is between like an in-person card game community space or game space versus like an in-person video game space? Or is there a difference, do you think?
The very first time that I ever went to play in a public space, went to the game store, and I was with my partner. We both play Magic, and he went and paid like his fee to start the game, and the guy at the cashier register walked away right afterwards, and I was standing right there. And he just like turned around, and like I was like, "Hey, excuse me," and he like turned around. He's like, "Can I help you?" Looking at me like I'm lost or something. I just kind of like pushed the money at him. He's like, "You're playing?" And I was like, "Are you?" Yes. And then I was actually like arsed to look around the room at that point, and I'm like, I am the only woman in this room, like literally. And it was an incredibly uncomfortable moment, because I'm like, then I felt so much pressure to actually do well, because especially since I was there with my partner, I didn't want everybody to look at me and say she's just got her boyfriend's deck. Right?
Yeah, or like she's just like he taught her how to play, or
Which is absolutely not what happened. He actually, I learned to play, and I got him back into playing Magic because I had, finally learned to play. Felt like it, So he had been out of like tournament scene for like 2 years, I want to say, and then I picked it up with a couple of friends one night, and then he wanted to play too. So it was actually the opposite. I got him to play.
You're responsible.
It is all my
Look what
fault.
you've done.
It might have been a mistake. But I didn't want that stereotype to be true, but it was, unfortunately, and maybe that's just the one here in town that I went to, and it's maybe the kinds that I've been to in other places. But
Everyone's shaking their head. Yeah. Everyone else.
I tried. Okay, I tried to be generous there. It was wildly uncomfortable to just be looked at like, what is going? Oh God! And like when they call out like next match, they'd be like, "I'm playing Betsy," and then they'd look around at everybody there and pretend like they didn't know.
It's like
who's that? It's like, are you serious?
The alternative to that, which is equally as gross, is when they all act like the one woman in the room is like the greatest thing ever.
Yeah, luckily I just got mostly ignored and kind of only a little bit of down talk and condescension. I would say minimal, but it was still really, really frustrating.
I just have an incredible amount of performance anxiety. So I just don't like. I remember my folks. I managed to convince them to drive me out to Toronto when they were doing the first like a pre-release tournament for Tempest, which is at this point, maybe I'm dating myself a whole bunch.
That was my first set.
Yeah, I'd been playing for a bunch of years, so my folks probably were like, maybe he's really good at this game. I bailed in like the first round. Like I just ate shit and was done. And I was like, I was like this young kid, and I was playing against someone who was like at least twice my age, and I just ate shit and left. And then like my folks drove me home, and I was just like, well, I got a bunch of cards before anyone else got them, so we stopped at the comic book store and I like showed them off, and then like went home.
Wait, hold on a second. You made your parents drive you to Toronto.
Yeah.
And on the way home, stop at a shop so you could show off your cards to the store owner.
Yes.
And then went home.
Yes.
Okay.
He feels Bordeaux rolling in his grave.
Oh my God.
Yeah. That was the only guy I wanted to show too. I was like, here you go, check it out.
My God.
Yeah, it was a real sad, my childhood was fine. It was just real weird. But yeah, no, like I don't have that drive to like go and like kick someone's ass or anything. At a certain point, like I like Netrunner a whole bunch, but I also like it just almost from a thematic perspective. So like I've been told by several people, but all of them are white dudes, that like the Netrunner community is actually relatively welcoming and like kind of approachable. But that said, I'm just like, maybe you just want to play with friends.
Well, and that's why Netrunner kind of drew me too, because Lee Alexander's a big like Netrunner player.
She wrote a book.
Yeah.
She wrote for Fantasy Flight, yeah.
So like I see that and I'm like, maybe it's not horrible. Or I see like with Hearthstone and what's her face? Oh my god, I should know this. Hafu, yeah. And she's like a big major player for Hearthstone, and she competes in tournaments, and she's like a top streamer and whatever. And like that's also like really rad and really cool. But I feel like it's still like you find those people like very rarely that are just women in the community. And I don't know, I could be wrong because I'm seeing this from the outside in, but yeah.
It does feel like it has like a high emotional cost to entry. Like, never mind the money to get involved with this. Like, it is a lot of pressure to decide you're going to go into these spaces and compete with people you've never met.
And I think actually this is where the question that you were asking is what's the difference between online and in-person play spaces. And I'm not defending Hearthstone as a community because it is salty, toxic, and problematic in a lot of respects. But
You mean community?
I know. Who would have thought? Pretty
so
controversial
strange.
things I'm saying here. The way that the games are designed and kind of the ethos of the people that play them, I think, has a big impact on the way that they treat people that are not traditionally overrepresented in these communities. And so I could say a lot of things about the living card games. Legend of the Five Rings specifically.
Oh, okay.
Set itself... What? Sorry, what?
Just that it's odd that you would pick that example.
Yeah.
So strange.
Which
I'm just being
Nobody
sarcastic.
trips you ever.
Okay, fine. I'll stop talking.
No.
Listeners of this podcast don't realize it, but he's actually got like an oxygen tank right next to him, and it's just going directly into his arm. It's weird.
It's not oxygen. It's like liquefied old magic cards.
Oh.
It's just like I need them in the bank.
I knew something smelled funky. God, it's coming out your pores.
It's kind of weird.
Just raw Garriott in the air.
You should see my shower. It's just,
Oh,
So Legends of the Five Rings.
A game I've
Garfield,
never
Garfield.
heard of before, but yeah.
It's okay, but that's I think precisely part of the reason why there's a difference in the way that communities treat people that are not traditionally overrepresented in them, is that Magic the Gathering is the apex predator of card games. So people are it's kind of like the dog piling, trying to get to the top of it. That's a gross oversimplification, but Legend of the Five Rings, everybody that played it, everybody that had anything to do with it, they were always like, we are not Magic because ... And so regardless of someone's actual political stance, their anything about them really, there was a very heavy focus on being welcoming and inclusive, and not at all the way that we saw Magic the Gathering players acting in the same store across the table from us regularly. And I mean, with there's a lot of problems with the Legend of the Five Rings community the way it was at the time. But I've heard from a lot of people who are not white dudes that the Legend of the Five Rings community was, in fact, considerably more welcoming and approachable than the Magic the Gathering thing. So without saying that this is, this field of Elysium where every problem is solved, I'm not trying to imply that, but there is difference in the way that these communities treat people that are not traditionally part of them or overrepresented in them. To the Hearthstone example, Hearthstone does it again a little bit differently. Blizzard did something really interesting. Blizzard is the company that developed Hearthstone, where they very, very seriously restricted the ways in which you can communicate and interact with the people that you are playing the game with. So much so, in fact, that they took a genre which is usually predicated on people speaking. I mean, card games are almost a conversation more than anything else, and restricted it down so that the only things you can do to your opponent as communicative acts, with some exceptions, are 6 conversation prompts, which boil down to hello, well played, I think you suck, oops, wow, and yeah, sorry, but they took sorry out, and this is interesting because nobody ever used sorry to say I'm sorry, like I took too long to do that turn, or sorry because like something went wrong or not your way. It was always like you would totally devastate your opponent and they'd be left with 1 health and like just totally destroyed with you're BMing, bad manners, right? And you just spam the sorry button to be like sorry, and they took it out. They took it out because it was being used as exclusively BM, and they replaced it with the wow command to be like, that's incredible, by the holy light. And so these.
Do you voice act for Hearthstone?
Maybe.
Is your last name Hearthstone? Are you Pearson Hearthstone?
Yeah, that's me. No, you just hear these things so much. I could probably do them off the cuff. Like
You should keep doing them.
Like I just did.
I don't think we have any other questions, do we?
Yeah, we'll just keep rolling with it.
Hello.
Uther.
You asked for it.
Keep going. I'm
You were
waiting.
right to awaken me.
Yes.
Pleasant feast of Wintervale. Yeah, I'm actually getting them pretty well.
Mother of
kind of.
mercy.
I've never played this game, but it sounds exactly like what I hear coming out of the computer sometimes.
Me go face. Okay, so back to reality.
Were we ever in reality?
No, actually, in fact, the whole point of this is that we weren't. The construction, the thesis of the thing that I was trying to say before it went hopelessly off the rails, if rails in fact ever existed, is that the way that these gaming communities are, the games around which these communities cohere has a, I think, measurable impact on the way that the communities treat the people in them. So much so, in fact, that I don't think it's for nothing that Netrunner in particular, because of the way that it handles representation and its thematic elements, is notable for being quite different in its approach to people that are not traditionally part of the overrepresented majority in gaming communities.
Did you want to elaborate on that? That's a huge.
Well, so I mean, there is. I think actually one of the major sources of news that I go to for Netrunner commentary is a Facebook group called Women of Netrunner. And it has kind of been held up as the corollary to the usually meme and salt-loaded normal Netrunner Facebook group that has basically just turned into people complaining endlessly about the game and well, doing normal game community things. We could devote a whole podcast to this topic.
Oh, for sure.
I do think there are differences. I can't empirically say what they are.
Yeah.
One of the first things that drew me to Netrunner is that there is an there's an equal split of genders in the characters, the runner cards. So like, you pick what character you want, and you're like, there's 3 women, 3 men. Or at least that's what the core set has. And they're all like pretty clothed and badass women. And no?
Core set only has 1 woman. Core set is Noise, who is a Chinese American hacker. Gabriel Santiago, who is Spanish American, and then Kate, who is a white woman. Those are the 3 identities in the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, there's.
I feel like there was more in whatever I have.
Well, so they added the new identities as the game goes along, and yeah, they've kept it. I don't have the count off the top of my head, but relatively.
When I checked, there was parity.
Okay.
So,
All right.
like, that was an interesting thing where I was like, oh, like, they could do sexy robot women, but they're not. And it's, like, kind of nice because there are a lot of, like, sexy magic cards out there, right? Like,
Yep.
kind of like, I don't know, from what I've seen.
The cardboard cutouts of Liliana are pretty much, yeah. Liliana in particular, I would say.
There are many boob ladies.
So much boob lady.
Any final thoughts? Anything else to add? We kind of covered a lot of ground.
I want a Dune LCG to come out like tomorrow.
You
There
heard
you
it, Fantasy
go.
Flight.
Right
yeah,
here.
Fantasy Flight. Make this happen.
Damon Stone, get on it.
Yeah.
Yep, tweet at Damon Stone.
Hashtag
Hit me up with
building
a
the
cool
list.
Shout outs to the Pokemon trading card game on the Game Boy Color. It's a good game. Back when, like, kids on the playground had their Pokemon cards taken away because it was considered gambling and you weren't allowed to do it.
Oh, but I learned so much about haggling, trading.
Right?
cards.
I did learn a lot
Yeah.
about
Right? That kind of stuff they don't teach you in school and they don't let you teach yourself at school.
State of education today.
Uncut.
Thank you for listening to the final podcast for FPS.
Thank you for listening to the First Person Podcast. I would like to thank Neil Randall and the staff at the Games Institute for their support, as well as Alex Fleck, our podcast producer. We'd also like to thank Stephen Trothan, who wrote and composed our theme music.